the fundamental problem with the alliance of the minorities.
Mm.
The minorities are too parochial to be anybody's allies. It doesn't really work. The whole theory of an alliance of minorities has been animating the Lebanese Christians, Israeli theoreticians, Alawites, the Shia, everybody got involved in this kind of speculation. There's a harsher reality. An alliance of minorities means that everybody focuses first and foremost on their own survival and on their own interests, and doesn't actually commit to the big fight in a way that would win it. In a war, unless you go into a full war of attrition, which none of these countries can fight because none of these countries can defend their infrastructure from air attacks.
Yes.
That means that the first blow has to be decisive. In 73, the Syrians failed to deliver the decisive aerial first blow that they were required to deliver. In 2023, the rest of the resistance axis failed to step up. We can imagine what kind of future we would be in if the Iranians had fully opened their arsenals on October 8th and started attacking, and so did the Iraqis, and so did the Lebanese, and. But the problem was that the Iranians kept on using this card as a deterrent, that we will threaten the Americans, which is what I thought this was a credible deterrent. They kept on using this deterrent that we would set the whole region on fire without actually doing so, which meant that the fire moved from one spot to the next, to the next, to the next, with the Iranians being absolutely hopeless and helpless and incapable of doing anything. This is the result. And now Yemen is being dismantled, and the Houthi are going to be receiving very severe blows and are receiving severe blows, and the Iranians won't do anything, and they will end up being isolated, faced with a choice. Either accept that the Islamic Revolution has catastrophically failed, which means regime change internally, or die in a blaze of glory, and for what purpose?
But isn't this already happening slowly after the death of the former president Raisi under the reformists now? Like, you see a soft swift in the approach of Iran.
If Assad teaches us anything, is that you can't accomplish soft switches. You know, the problem that Iran has is huge. 40 years of work on exporting the Islamic Revolution have turned to ash. And Khamenei's designated successor and his key commanders have all died before him. And the credibility of the Islamic Revolution internally is gone. And you see that in the collapse of the currency. And the question then becomes, why should there be sanctions and a revolutionary regime when in reality the revolution has failed and you can't deliver anything? And if they make a deal with the Americans, it would make everything worse, for the same exact reason that for Assad, shaking hands with Olmert was impossible. The problem was for them, the problem is now for the Iranians, that if they make a deal with what they call the Great Satan, in what sense is this an Islamic revolution? And if this isn't an Islamic revolution, why is Khamenei in power? And why should the Assembly of Experts choose Khamenei's successor? So the reality that's happening now is that Trump doesn't really need a war with Iran, and if he wages one, nobody knows how wars end, you know? The reality is that Iran's own internal narrative has fully collapsed. This has been the greatest success for the Israelis.
So you anticipate in this case probably more internal change in the country, probably through protests, or because war against Iran, it's going to have big repercussions on the Gulf countries.
Yeah. if they decide to attack the Gulf. The Gulf countries are saying we're not going to allow the Americans to use our airspace or to use bases on our territory. So the Americans will have to run this out of Diego Garcia and out of aircraft carriers.
Diego Garcia is located in
the Indian Ocean.
Indian Ocean.
The main base on the in the Indian Ocean that is, within refueling range. Refueling range, with refueling and with all kinds of things. So the Americans could fight the war this way if they want to, and they could cause some serious damage this way. But frankly, maintaining the pressure on Iran is slowly collapsing the regime, because they know that they need sanctions relief. They have deep internal divisions at this stage. Khamenei, in a way, consolidated too much, but then the designated successor that he wanted to hand over to Raisi died, and we don't know
Who was
how.
that person? Who was that person?
I think it was Raisi.
Raisi.
I think if you look at the trajectory of Raisi, he was in the judiciary, meaning that he was deeply involved in investigations and in things like that. Then he went to the presidency and he became president. This was giving him the executive experience necessary to run the country. The next logical step would have been, for somebody who's such a hardliner, and of his age, would have been supreme leader after Khamenei. The other candidate seems to be Mujtaba. This would be a strong candidate, but then for the Iranian public, why did we get rid of the Shah only to make this into a hereditary thing? Why? What's the reasoning behind it? So they're facing a real crisis of legitimacy. And if they appoint some old 80-year-old cleric to be supreme leader, he's never going to be able to govern, because there are so many levers of power in Iran that you have to consolidate over and control in order to govern effectively, like Khamenei does, then an old cleric with no background is going to be useless.
Yes.
So the Iranians are reaching the end of the line here. And the big beneficiaries for that in the short term are the Israelis, but in the long term are the Turks.
Yes. I was going to come to that with you.
Yeah.
Now that Turkey is also expanding in Syria, and they said they have struck a deal with the Jolani government to